Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 6 of Entrepreneur Gains, where I interview Y Combinator alumni. On today's episode, I interview my good friend, James Sinka, founder of Hypnos, a company that helps you discover which sleep habits actually affect your sleep and thus help improve your quality of sleep. James is a chemist and has a very different perspective than an average startup founder. He's been really interested in trying to get more science out of the lab and into the real world, as compared to taking the easy route of staying in academia. The biggest topic that we discuss in this episode is pivoting. James has gone through a bunch of pivots in the last year, and we discuss all that in this episode. I hope you guys like it. I want to start this with knowing about your story, how did you get in the startup world? How was the experience with the startup you went through in YC? Like, how did you get to where you are
Yeah,
right now?
for sure. So I had a bit of an unconventional startup experience. I think that most people, I started off as a chemist and undergraduate, and I was really interested in entrepreneurship almost by a need to see what I was doing, make it to the next level. So I was fortunate enough at undergraduate RIT to be working on a project where we were trying to develop inks that could be printed to make solar panels. And the vision there was that we could take these inks and we could use them and use the same hardware architecture and infrastructure that you would use to make magazines or newspapers to literally print roll to roll continuously solar panels. And I'd been afraid of climate change my entire life. I knew that it was a serious problem, and so I saw that as like a sign, a calling sign for me to work on it, especially compounding the fact that in Rochester, Kodak was in our backyard, and Kodak was the largest film producer in the world at one period, so they had all the infrastructure that was ready. A lot of professors actually working on this, doing this work, were ex-Kodak professors. So it felt like the cards lined up, and I saw no one taking it extremely seriously, and I thought like I had to do this. And so I was working on this project, and I hit a point where the research that I was doing, in order to get it to a point where it would actually make a difference, where the power that you could get out of these panels was equivalent to what you see on someone's roof,
Okay.
I had to deviate my research from what my professors were doing. So they're really focused on like the theory of like, okay, how can we make these inks and what kind of inks can we make, as opposed to me saying like, okay, we need to have a certain level of performance or this isn't going to make a difference. And that was like the first time that the economics factor actually made an impact on me at all. Like I was just a scientist wanting to solve a really curious problem, but I didn't realize at all what the factor of economics would play in this problem solving at all. So in order to do that, I was out of funding. I had no support besides just being able to use that research lab. So I petitioned and applied to the NSF and to New York State's Research and Energy Development Authority
Okay.
for funding and got 100K to work on this project. But the stipulation was there had to be a commercial attempt and a business formed around the technology because they wanted to see that money invested come back as business opportunity for the state.
Right.
So we basically got like a 12-week course where we'd learn business of, specifically this was renewable energies. So they'd plug us into mentors who had done renewable energy businesses before, talk to us about how to talk to suppliers, how to talk to potential customers of our technology. And we actually got an LOI for the tech that we were building. So I had to become an entrepreneur. I had to learn that side of the business in order to see the work that I was doing come to life. And so I didn't necessarily choose to be a founder initially. Like I didn't set it out to be like, oh, I want to build the next Facebook, or oh, I want to be the owner of $1 billion tech company or what have you. It was just it was a required part of the process for me to do what I wanted to do at the level that I wanted to do it and actually make an impact on the world.
That's amazing. So you didn't go with the mindset I want to be a startup founder. You just did university. You went to university. You were being a chemist. You were doing the research which you loved, and from
Yeah.
there it kind of led into just like the stars align, and you kind of went to the startup route basically.
Yeah, there was this really painful realization that I think I made, which was I had to confront the fact of reality, the truth that unless something is economically feasible in that it generates sufficient profits, it's not going to maintain itself over the long term. So the
Right.
impact that I would have with my chemistry, I wouldn't be able to get it. I wouldn't actually be able to print these solar panels roll to roll and pump them out like they used to magazines or newspapers unless I could get a business model to work around it, unless the economics popped up. So, like you're saying, I didn't even know about Y Combinator when I was in undergraduate. I never found the internet personally to be very interesting. I'd always been interested in chemicals because everything around us in the real world is made up of chemistry.
Right.
So I knew that it could be applied to a whole different range of opportunities. And it came that in order for me to actually do anything of substance and not just be like all the rest of the researchers, I had to learn entrepreneurship and I had to learn business. And the other side of that is 99.9% of inventions and innovations don't actually leave the laboratory. So
Wow.
scientists, physicists, chemists, biologists, computer scientists invent all kinds of beautiful things. Um, but literally almost none of them ever make it out to the commercial world and never touch your life or touch my life or anyone's life. And that's heartbreaking. That's painful because we have so much innovation. And part of that is, again, because the economics don't make sense. But I couldn't let myself just say, oh, it's fine for me to bring it. Like I could just write a paper, oh, I can just do a PhD thesis and then like call it a day.
Yeah.
I felt like the work that I was doing was more important than that. So entrepreneurship was the only way to make that happen. So I just had to step up to the plate or go home.
Right. I have a lot of questions about this because I was thinking about this analogy about being an artist, like a rapper or something, and like like it's like before Spotify, like legit, you had like it's so hard to kind of get out there, or like before YouTube, I mean, right? But before we get into that, I want to actually ask you about what happened when you jumped into the startup world. How did that evolve? How was it like for you, and like the whole journey of the startups?
Yeah. So what was interesting was that project, the solar printing of solar cells, didn't actually make it past our LOIs and past prototypes. So my vision, the dream, the reason I chased that project was because I realized, or I could envision the world being fixed of climate change by just having solar panels so cheap, literally 1/10 to 1/100th of the cost, which scale we could get these panels down to. But the solar panel cost, like the actual physical thing you put on your roof, is only 10% of the overall cost of installing solar. So even if we could get that cost from 10% down to zero, so the cost would go from 100% to 90%, that 90% of the cost is still too high to warrant a full transition over from non-renewables to solar energy.
Got it.
So like thankfully, I made that realization, I had that understanding, I went down the path and I learned that like, oh, that's one of the reasons why, again, 99.9% of innovations don't leave the lab, right? That there's that economic component that's missing there. But while we were working on that project, my roommates and I were frustrated because we were drinking so much cold brew coffee. And this was, I think, 2015 or 2014, and we loved cold brew. It was incredible. It was amazing. It was like this underground sort of coffee thing. And being that I'm a chemist, and some of the partners I was working with also chemists, we thought, well, we can't just constantly be making cold brew for 24 hours to have us run out every single day. Like we have efficient lives to build. I'd meal prep. I would have routines that I'd set up to try to make my life more efficient, so I could spend more time in the lab working on this project, as I'm sure every entrepreneur does
Yeah.
with their time.
Startups. Yeah.
Um, yeah, exactly. It's just how it is. So we developed a technology to do it in 30 minutes instead of 24 hours. So that way we could get back to work. It was like, oh, we're missing out on coffee. Cool. Let's just make a 30-minute batch. Or we could spend 2 hours brewing enough coffee for the entire week. We didn't have to worry about it.
Wow. Okay.
So after I graduated, we pursued that business model, and actually I was introduced to Y Combinator through Paul Graham's essays at the end of the closing of that printed solar cell project. So my undergraduate went from 4 to 5 years. So I basically added on a year to do the printing of the solar cells as an actual like business feat, a business attempt, and then during that time, I discovered PG. Someone encouraged me to apply to Y Combinator. I decided, okay, we're going to apply with this coffee deal. And Y Combinator completely changed the perspective of what I thought entrepreneurship was.
Yep.
It was, they were very raw. They were very real. It was sort of like a no bullshit approach to like, you need to focus on one thing. You didn't have one KPI, one key performance indicator. And if you don't move that forward, you're a failure. And the beautiful thing about the raw truth of being in Y Combinator and in the real business world is that you do fail and things don't get finished and things don't make it. in academia and undergraduate, and even with this project, it was like, okay, like if I don't make it, it's fine. I get to add to the a leaf to the tree of knowledge for humanity. Okay, but in YC in entrepreneurship, you learned like if you don't make it, you're just dead. Like
Yep.
just call it a day, move on, do something else. And
Yep.
so that rawness, that truth was eye opening. And on top of the fact that coffee was a consumer business, and I would only had my experience in B2B and renewable energy, whereas like coffee is a very different business, was very eye opening to get mentorship from people who had experience in consumer, in products, in consumer packaged goods.
Right.
So it completely took what I knew about business, which was just basically like, okay, I need to do like a 5-year forecast to see how my technology is gonna turn out, and really it was like 5 years and then like a 20-year forecast based on how the patents worked. To know, hey, you need to prove that people will buy your coffee today, and then in a week again, and then in a month again, and then maybe figure out like kind of what like a year and 5 years looks like, but like your 5-year projection is completely bullshit, and
Yep.
like that blew me away. I had no idea. Like I took a minor in business at undergrad, like to be like, okay, I need this to support myself entrepreneurially, and we didn't do any forecasting. It didn't matter at all, and that was jaw dropping. That was eye opening. But it makes a lot of sense, and so I don't want to fault academics because I think that they taught me a lot,
Yep.
but they definitely don't give you the full picture. And so having the rubber hit the road and actually knowing that if I don't make enough money this month, I'm not going to be able to pay my rent.
Right.
That was real. That was raw, and it teaches you more than anything else can. And YC gave us that opportunity.
Right. Love it. And then last, I guess the part of the story where like
Yeah,
uh the whole how was the ride through your company, and like where you are right now? What was like the whole like the journey that over there once you got into the YC?
for sure. So when we, so, hilariously funny story. So we applied to YC with our coffee extraction technology, and at the time, in order to make ends meet, because we graduated in May, we moved into the cheapest. Me and my co-founder Andrew Fleischer moved into the cheapest absolute place we could. For rent was $300 a month, and we knew we had to make basically 400 to 500 to break even, right? Because we had to pay for food and utilities. And so we were just selling coffee at the local farmers market. And when we applied to YC, we applied as a coffee company. We had an LOI actually from basically the Whole Foods of the East Coast, a company called Wegmans, who would actually take our product and put it on store shelves. We'd start off with one store and then move on and expand.
Love it.
Um, but between when we applied and when we got accepted for an interview, the farmers market where we're selling, we actually found someone who was selling CBD hemp. And being that we're chemists, our light bulbs went off and we're like, whoa, wait, we developed an extraction technology for coffee. Why don't we apply it to hemp? And we tweaked it for over a couple of days, and we figured out actually we can extract the CBD out of hemp. And since we were selling coffee, we were already the beverage guys. We decided to start selling CBD lemonade alongside the coffee. And our sales week, we'd average a coffee a week. We sold 1.2K of CBD lemonade in a week, and we're like, oh my god,
Whoa.
okay, this is the future.
I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah,
Okay.
crazy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And this was at I want to say the end of 2018. And so when we showed up for our interview, right, like everyone still thought we were a coffee company because our application was that way. We show up with CBD lemonade, and we're like, no, 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 we're actually a cannabinoid extraction company. And the reason we iterated that way is because we saw, right, there was way more business to be done in cannabinoid extraction. And when we got an interview, we emailed and called every YC company that was in the cannabis space that we possibly could, and we pitched them on our technology. We're like, hey, we understand you're doing cannabis, so are we. Here's what we've invented. Here's why it's useful. And we managed to get 2 LOIs from 2 cannabis companies in YC to say, hey, we would use technology if we could have it.
I love it.
So yeah, we showed up with those LOIs. We showed up with our increased revenues. We showed up with both the coffee and the CBD, just so they could see that we were legit. We weren't just bullshitting.
Yeah.
And then they tried them on the spot. And then that evening we got accepted. So we went from a coffee company to a CBD lemonade company to a B2B extractions company.
Dude, that's
Um,
genius. So, sorry,
yeah,
out of curiosity, you did that before you got into YC? You reached out to every YC company who was in CBD?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But particularly cannabis. So we got. I think we applied in like August. We got an acceptance to be interviewed in October,
right.
and then our interview date was in November. So from October, from when we got the yes to November, all we did, because it was like we had to book flights within 3 weeks or whatever. All we did was email every company we could in YC. Was like, listen, here's what we're doing. Here's why we think it'll be useful. Please, like, let's have a conversation. Let's explore to see if
Yeah.
this is even beneficial for you. And so I got to take the training from the B2B solar cell project, which was like, hey, talk to suppliers or talk to potential business partnerships before you actually have the product ready, to see if they'd be interested in even buying it if you make it.
Yeah.
And so like that would be clutch. That was cool.
Also,
And
sorry, also cutting you off, but it's genius on like four levels. I can see one, because right 1 month before your interview, you're meeting all these founders and you're getting advice from them for a CBD company. Why, like, what made you want to? How did you get in? Like all that kind of stuff, like pre-interview advice. Two, when you go in the room, you can say, hey, we already have two YC companies ready to go. Founders are, you're like, that's amazing, bro.
yeah,
That's fucking genius. That's so
thank you, man.
cool.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I like after our interview, so Gustav, if you, for any of you
Mhm.
guys that are familiar with the YC community, Gustav's an amazing partner. He was one of the people that interviewed us, and he specifically called up one of the companies we had an LOI with, California Dream, and the CEO, and he was like, "Hey, like, is this true? Is this LOI real?" And over the phone, they were like, "Yeah, listen, this company's amazing. We think their technology is super useful. Here's all the reasons why we've actually been having troubles that they would specifically solve." So we were so lucky to have like made the right partnerships, that we got pull from the inside, helping us get into YC.
That is great.
It, yeah. So to anyone that's applying, to anyone that has a B2B company, do your work and validate that people actually want what you need ahead of time. Because if it's a no, then you're going to save yourself all the grief and the time and the trouble and the mental pain of figuring that out over the course of 6 months, when you could figure it out in the course of 6 days.
Right. Makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Very
So
cool.
from
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
yeah, we were a B2B cannabis company when we got into YC. So this was like end of December into January. The YC program was January until end of March. Um, and we developed Insomnia actually as we were going through YC. So we were plugged into 3 cannabis companies that we're doing B2B partnerships with. And my co-founder and I were just like unable to sleep. And it may have been the stress, but not necessarily, because we were self-medicating with CBD, with THC where we needed to. And even still, there was still like this tension. We couldn't go to bed. And we had just, what was it, 4 or 5 weeks ago, been a coffee company. So we were kind of dealing with all this intense, crazy shift, moving our stuff from New York over to California, getting situated with San Francisco, and then just being on this sort of like a really high, fast pace movement, which is good for us, right? Ton of learning. But also the need to adapt was fairly intense. We could feel it. So we looked into how we could solve our own problem of insomnia while we were working forward with being a B2B cannabis company. And we discovered a compound called CBN, cannabinol, which is different than CBD, which is cannabidiol. And there have been papers in the 60s and 70s that have been shown that you can actually use it to tranquilize animals. And so we decided to synthesize some, since we were chemists. We still had our chemistry acumen. We just put on the lab coats. And we're like, all right, let's figure out how to do this. We synthesized it, we purified it, and then we started to give it to other people after we tried it ourselves and found that it improved our sleep. And the way we actually tested how valuable it was we found people with sleep trackers, and those that didn't have any, we gave them sleep trackers, and we said, okay, here's one, and here's a second product. We're not going to tell you which is real, which is not, but you take them on different days, and we're going to see, based on your sleep tracker data, if it helps or if it doesn't help you go to sleep. And we found that our formulation with CBN did actually improve people's sleep. They fell asleep faster and they had deeper sleep. And so when we pitched at YC, that our demo day, we pitched as a natural product to help you go to sleep faster and go to sleep
Interesting.
more deeply.
Interesting.
So in the course of 4 months, 5 months, we had basically 4 pivots, and we presented. We raised $500,000. It was great. It was fantastic. But there was all this iteration.
That's
And
such an
then
amazing. Go ahead. No, no.
I was just going to say that the final pivot came. We ended up working on this project for a few months, and there's this me and my co-founder, once we started investing in the production line, getting the packaging, talking to distributors. There's a lot of basically behind the scenes work you have to do in the legal California cannabis market to get a product like this available on store shelves. We were going through all that motion. We were about a month away from launching. We started to feel out that we didn't think this is the right decision. And the reason is because we didn't want to medicate people that didn't need medicine. As a chemist and anyone that studied
Right.
neurobiology or neurochemistry or biochemistry, you know that all products, everything that you consume, has both a positive and a negative. Everything's a double-edged sword. There's
Right.
nothing without it.
Right.
And we don't know what the long-term consequences of cannabinoids are. We know that for some people, there are consequences. And frankly, if you can survive taking less chemicals than necessary, then you should. You shouldn't overload yourself unnecessarily in chemicals, especially
Right.
if we don't know what the 50-year consequence is. So we felt this kind of guilt, and we realized, like, oh, in the same way we tested to see what the strength or the efficacy, the performance of our CBN product was using sleep trackers, we could test any kind of thing against sleep trackers, whether it be blue light blocking glasses or a weighted blanket or CBD or melatonin or anything that would improve your sleep, and therefore figure out exactly per person what would make the impact on their sleep, and they wouldn't need to take drugs that they didn't otherwise need to.
Right.
So we then, painstakingly unwound and disconnected from all the work that we'd done in the back end of the California cannabis industry, and wound down all of our B2B operations to say, okay, we want to focus and see if we can fix each person's sleep using their sleep tracker data that would give us an insight of what does and what doesn't work. And we've since transitioned that from a one-on-one coaching method to a digital online self-serve application that people can use on their own time and can therefore reliably do it at a lower price without having to have like a human person on the other side giving them all this advice, because obviously human capital is expensive, it's worthwhile, it takes a lot of time and effort to bring through. But we really had a wild ride just going from one iteration to the next, and frankly it was our conscience that said we had to make this difference, because I just wouldn't be happy with myself drugging people who didn't necessarily need that drug.
Dude, that's such an amazing story, and yeah, that's crazy that how many pivots you guys did, and then coming to that conclusion. Because you're right, if you think about it right now in U.S. with the whole opioid stuff that's going on, right? Like that's like those people, a lot of people of them didn't really need the drugs, right? It just
No,
they
no.
just got used to it, and so good on you, man, for coming to that conclusion and like leaving a potentially multi-million-dollar idea on the table, and like and not yeah good, really good for you, man. I respect that a lot.
Thank you.
Um, before we get in, so I have one last question before we get into
Yeah,
the learnings part of it. I have one last question about
yeah.
story part of it. Now that you've been doing sleep tracking company, right? And you've had so many pivots. Are you at a stage right now where you're actually genuinely like you're enjoying it, or you think there's more pivots along the line, or still trying to figure yourself out? And like because I'm sure it's also been a lot of like personal growth here as well, right?
Definitely,
While
definitely.
doing this whole thing. So where are
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
right at this very moment?
For sure. I would say that we're still in the experimentation phase. And that's because we haven't hit what in the entrepreneurial scene we consider or we call product market fit.
Right.
And that's when your product is so well tuned and solves the exact precise nuanced problem that your customers need, that instead of you pulling for customers, customers are showing up and banging down your door for demand.
Right.
And so while startups aren't in product market fit phase, their entire goal is to search for product market fit. And there's a lot of great essays and articles you can read about product market fit, how to find it, how to iterate it. But at its core, the way you get there is through experimenting and talking to customers. You're looking at how they use your product, and you get that feedback, and you synthesize, you have new ideas, and you chase down different versions of what you're doing until you get to a point where you solve that point, that problem very, very specifically, and you hit product market fit.
Yep.
So this where we're at right now is exactly there. We're doing that kind of experimentation. We learned that though the interpersonal specific person to person coaching was useful and had amazing outcomes. Like we've improved so many people's sleep significantly, to the point where some people don't have to take over the counter drugs to go to bed every night. Like I would consider that to be a huge win. We learned that the price point was actually just insurmountable for many people. So we had I think like a wait list of over 500 people that wanted to partake, and we could only maybe like 30 to 5 of them could actually afford our program. So we knew that we had to shift things around. We're working on this software driven, we're trying to go for the same type of result, but through a different kind of format. And so it's not necessarily where I feel it's not where we expected to be.
Yep.
Right. But in the same way, when I look at that startup journey from where we started and where we are now, I could have never expected that we would get here.
Yep.
So In the same way that I was learning how to do new things 3 years ago when I was working on trying to print solar panels, I'm still learning on how to interact with customers and how to design products that really help solve people's problems at their core.
Yep.
And that's exciting. That's
Right.
interesting. That's a problem that you can still, like this, at least the scientist in me can still see, okay, we're running an experiment. Here's the independent variable. Here's the dependent variable. Let's see how it goes. Let's see what result we're going to get. And
Right.
so that's still fun.
Awesome. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
That was an amazing story. Let's move to part two. I have a lot of questions for you.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Let's do it.
I want to start with this. So first of all, like you've had so many iterations, right? And the
Yes.
part that I love the most is that all those iterations have been based on what you loved, like or what your problem was. You're solving your own nature, right?
Totally.
How important is that? And what if someone doesn't know, like, what really inspires them, but they still want to be an entrepreneur? Like how, like what, like yeah, how important is that, and like how should they proceed?
Totally. So there's two parts there that I want to uncover. The first one is if you have the problem that you're trying to solve, you're automatically a good customer. You know what the solution would need to at least to feel like, maybe not necessarily what it precisely looks like, because you still have to iterate and experiment over that process. But if you know that, for an example, you're having troubles going to sleep, you can at least experiment on yourself and see what puts you to sleep. So having that trouble or having the problem that you're trying to solve specifically makes it way, 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 way better and way easier to solve or to build a solution to that problem. I think the classic example is Mark Zuckerberg wanted a place where he could look up what, like the directory of his classmates and see what classes were being taken and get reviews on those classes from other people at his university. And you couldn't do that with the traditional like university. I think it was like the white pages basically. So he had to build his own site to do that, where people would comment on like, oh, this history class is amazing. You should take it. The professor is great. So by having your own that problem, you can use your own intuition, your own compass as a guide to get to the first few iterations, and then from there, you should be listening to customers to kind of understand like what you need to build next, or
Right.
what would help bring you to product market fit. And now the second part of that is like, what if you want to be an entrepreneur, like you said, and you don't necessarily have that problem, or you don't have a problem that you're trying to solve in general? And there, I would say that you can be an entrepreneur in many different ways. In my mind, I believe that being an entrepreneur just means taking on more of the responsibility, and in exchange for potentially being rewarded more for the extra responsibility that you're taking. And so you can be an entrepreneur within a company, right? You can, or even better, if you are an entrepreneur, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you can go work for a company that is in its early stages, that is entrepreneurial, is still tight, is still small, where people still have to wear all these different hats and they have a lot of responsibility instead of just being a replaceable individual within a bigger company. So you don't necessarily need to have either a problem that you want to solve, or like some great vision of a company that you're trying to build. But if you want to taste what entrepreneurship is like, working for a startup is a great way to do
Yep.
that. And I think Y Combinator has like a work for a startup.com or a resource like that that'll help you find other companies that you could work for to get a flavor for what that's like.
Right.
And frankly, if you don't like it, that's a great way to know, because you haven't put in all this emotional energy of having your own baby that you then have to abandon. It's, you worked for someone else, you felt out what it was like, and then you can move on without as many repercussions to having started your own company.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think an important question to ask could be, are you doing it because of your ego, because you want to show to your friends, look, I have a startup,
Mm,
right? Or I want to, or once I exit the startup, I will have like a freaking $1 billion or whatever. Or are you doing it
yeah,
because you're genuinely fucking passionate about it, excited about it, right? What would you say? Yeah, would you
yeah,
agree with that?
totally. So I totally agree, and I think the media these days has made it more glamorous to want to work on a startup or build a startup than it actually is. And yes, there are upsides, like there are billion-dollar hits, but those are one in 10,000 or 100,000.
Right.
And frankly, if you're not doing it because you love it, then you're not going to make it through all of the pain and all of the trough of sorrow is actually a term that Paul Graham puts up to
Yep.
describe this point where you're not doing a great
Like
amount
ups and
of
downs. Yeah.
you're not making a ton of progress. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it through those trenches and actually see it through the success unless you have a really, really deep passion for the thing that you're building. And in terms of ego and being able to show other people like, hey, look, I'm an entrepreneur, or put it, on your Twitter, on your LinkedIn, whatever.
Yeah.
For one thing, that's definitely overrated. But for another, I think that it's also worth pointing out that there is some level of like, hey, I need to feel like I'm doing something meaningful.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's very difficult to find meaning where you're currently working or what you're currently grinding on. And so being an entrepreneur allows you to be more flexible and necessarily pursue something that is more meaningful. And so like there is, I think, a general distaste or a general desire in our society in 2020 to find things that are really meaningful.
Right.
And entrepreneurship is definitely a way to do that, but it shouldn't be like a cop out for doing that, right? Like entrepreneurship should basically be like the last resort. It's like the only way I can do that meaningful thing is by being an entrepreneur, because it's going to be the most work intensive and the most difficult and the most stressful out of all of your possible options.
Right.
So I would say, maybe cut yourself out a little bit of work and try to find meaning in other things that you could do or other jobs. Maybe look for a different job that could give you that meaning. Because all in all, you save yourself a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of grief if
Yeah.
you do that, as opposed to just starting your own company because you're like, oh, I want to feel a little bit more meaning. Because it's valid. That desire is valid. But don't go down this path thinking, oh, it's going to be easy. Oh, it's going to be glamorous. Oh, people are going to want to talk to me. It's rough. It's tough,
It is
and it weeds
very
you out.
rough. Yeah. I would also say it'd be kind of cool to like break it down, right? Like are you like, is it like, if you want to be an entrepreneur, is it like a
Yeah.
startup founder kind, like, like, or is it like just like like, having your own business and like, managing clients for like whatever reason, like a couple of clients, right?
Oh
Or
yeah.
small, or you can just kind of go
Yeah.
into any direction, but just think about the consequences. Because especially with startups, I kind of feel
Yeah.
like the idea sounds great, but I think about this and I'm like, man, I don't think that I would enjoy having a 300 people team and dealing with that every freaking day. Like
Dude.
I like my space. I like to like
Yes.
have freedom in life. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
it seems
Yeah.
good in theory, but in practicality, only a certain kind of people enjoy that. Like I enjoy the problem solving of it, but then I think about the whole
Sure.
managing the
Totally.
team part, the growing the whole team part. I'm like, I don't want to do that. And it's me. I'm
Absolutely.
not saying that everybody's different, obviously, but yeah,
For sure.
so
Yeah.
crazy.
And I would build on top of that to say, um, just because you want to be an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you have to go for $1 billion company to do that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
like the whole $1 billion notion is just for how venture capital works. And
yeah,
so venture capital basically gives you money up front today for you to pay them back in 5 years, 10 times what they paid you. So it's almost like like kind of like a loan, but you have to pay back 10 times what you borrowed. And that only works, the mathematics of that only works out if you're trying to shoot for the $1 billion company that has 300 employees,
yeah,
right? But you could be, an entrepreneur that solves a local problem, or someone that like, maybe you're really passionate about cooking and you just want to open up your own like bakery on the side. Like that's totally super valid entrepreneurship, and you're
yeah,
going to get rewarded for that. And it might just be like a 5-person operation, and that's great.
yeah,
But I think it's really important to understand what you want first, and
yeah,
then go out and, like you said, do sort of the analysis, see what fits with your lifestyle. Because being like a tech entrepreneur, being a Silicon Valley startup founder is such a different ballgame than being like a bakery owner or running like just a very small piece of software for a niche community.
yeah, yeah. Self-awareness, basically. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to. So, with respect to your being a chemist, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you
Yeah. Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
I remember you said that 99% of people just stay in the, in the lab, um, and they don't like basically like go out and explore because of so many reasons, like you mentioned in your story. But so how can those people get out and do stuff, and like how can they make the most out of it, the craft that they have? They're so smart, they're
Yeah.
so they're an artist in a sense, right? And how can they take
Absolutely.
take that art and like kind of go out and yeah.
Totally. And so what's beautiful about a lot of modern science, I'm going to say particularly biotechnology, is that there's been a lot of decreasing costs in terms of there's more labs that are opening up that allow you to work in like it's co-working or co-shared lab space, being able to run computational models to figure out if what you're going to do, if like a protein that you're targeting will make sense for a certain drug application, or even just like if you have an idea for how to edit the genes of yeast, you can submit those edits to a company who will do all of that lab work for you. So there's more infrastructure nowadays for you to do like high level science work without actually owning or being in a university. So that's the first piece. But the second piece I would say is it needs to come from inside, right? If you don't feel like what you're working on is going to be game changing, is going to really make a difference, and that you, the expert, because typically these scientists that are doing their own research, they're like one of five people or one of one person in the world that's focusing on this axis. If you think the thing that you're working on is important enough, then you should learn how to get it out there. And the easiest way to do that is just to talk to more people. But like we as scientists are trained to write very highly technical papers that are only written or only decodable by other people in science. And that's very difficult for the modern person to understand. But you could like inspire kids to be scientists, that if you explain it to them in ways that they could understand, you would kind of pass the torch on to the next generation. And then the most important, which I've seen so much happen in undergraduate, and I know so many PhDs and master students that are in this position, but if you don't love what you're doing, you don't love what you're studying, and you don't love what you're researching, just change it.
Right.
There are so many meaningful problems in the world that need to get solved. So many advances that are happening. Like just take the 3 months, 6 months off, take a sabbatical, what have you, and explore what's naturally interesting and curious to you. And then you'll find what the most important problems are to solve there. And a quick hat tip to Sam Altman. He says that you should be asking, what is the most important problem in my industry that I can possibly solve?
Right.
And I think if more scientists did that, we'd have more breakthroughs in really important areas of science, like fusion technology, as an example, which would totally make all fossil fuels irrelevant. So if you don't do it necessarily, like if you're not trying to optimize your science for meaning or for leverage or to benefit the greater good, I would ask, like, why are you being a scientist? And if it's to solve complex problems, I'm telling you, you're going to get a great kick out of solving a complex problem that also will add an important leaf to it, a very important tree of knowledge, rather than something that's kind of like esoteric and niche and maybe not so important. So pick meaningful research for one thing, and also tell people about it, right? Especially young kids who are still in their formative years, who have the opportunity to dream and who want to think about the future in the way that you are as a scientist, and who might find inspiration in what you're doing and want to carry that torch of being a scientist, of being a researcher themselves.
Right. But I also remember you said something about like, a lot of people, a lot of scientists keep the science in the lab and not take it to the real
Yes,
world, right?
for sure.
How can people do more of that? I remember you mentioned something about Peter Thiel talking about this concept as well, or something along the lines.
Definitely. So it's easy to point to that statistic and say, look, like there's 99.9% of inventions or innovations just like don't leave academia. Um, and like part of the way you would get some of that to happen is by being a little bit more vocal about what you're developing. But some of the other part would actually just to say, fuck it, this is important enough. Like, let me try to commercialize it myself. Like,
Right.
let me actually make this real. And the cost of failure is actually very, very low. Um, if you have expertise in a space, if you have the desire and the drive to see what you're doing hit the real world. So again, I'd argue that if people are, if researchers are really passionate about the problem that they're solving, you shouldn't just say, okay, like once I've written a paper, this is it, or like, oh, I'm just gonna like let it toil in the lab, because your work isn't going to mean anything unless it's brought out of the lab. So look for other companies that you might be able to partner with that could take your innovation from a lab space and actually commercialize it. Or if you're in the space of biochemistry or biotechnology, there's so many pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies that you could talk to and say, like, hey, look, here's the line of research that I'm doing. Like, how can we do this research better so that way you could license it, or that you could take it from our lab and actually move it out into the real world? And granted, the biotechnology company will take most of the expenses and so on and so forth. But so long as you align yourself and you know that the goal is to make something useful, you can talk to these other players. You can do this other research. You can be more vocal. You can pick more meaningful science. And then once it's done, you can like email and contact and reach out to individuals who you think could benefit. And even if they can't, they might know someone who will. And so at the end of the day, it's up to you to see that it actually makes a meaningful impact on society. But if you're researching it in the first place, you believe in what you're doing. So wield that self-belief and let it fuel you, let it take you to that next level.
Love it, man. That's awesome. Um, One thing that I love about you, by the way, as we can see from this conversation, that you are an amazing conversationalist and you're a great networker. Uh, Obviously, that helps you a lot. That helps you, when you're going out there, when you are pitching your product, when you're passionate about what you do. What if someone doesn't have that? Because most of the startup people, and you already know this, they're mostly like nerdy. They're mostly, they have hard time talking. So, like, how important is this skill, and what can other people do who don't have this?
Okay. So that's a very tough question because
Yeah,
I was an introvert for the majority of my life, and I'm definitely still very introverted. But when it comes to talking about things that I'm passionate about, that I care about,
yeah.
that kind of falls away. It
Dude,
disappears.
cutting you off, I just want listeners to know because you're saying you're very introverted. I remember being at Camp YC and you were like getting everyone ramped up on freaking CBD coffee. Like I remember we just walked in there and everyone was like drinking, and you were like going like person to person, and like I don't know. I think I thought you were such a charismatic person. Because I mean,
Thank you.
obviously YC is like when you go there, you like these people like you've looked up to, like you saw Micah Seibel, like freaking $1 billion exit, and
Yeah,
you were like, hey man, want to have a CBD coffee? And you're like kind of, I don't know. I thought you were pretty
yeah.
extroverted. I would have never guessed that, but
But like the cure to that, the reason I was able to conjure that level of extroversion was because I was talking about something that I cared about,
okay,
something that I was knowledgeable about, that I was passionate about. And so if you ask me to do the same thing about like sports, I don't care about sports at all. So I can't
right,
I can't even listen to a conversation. I want to go into a corner and like, open up Twitter or something like that. It's not my jam. So I would say to those who feel introverted, like just try talking about things that you care about, that you're passionate about, and you'll just find that it comes out. And if you're talking to people who are also interested, they'll just ask and they'll be like, "So how did that work? And why is
right,
it this way? And how did it get that way?" And you'll just find that they almost bring it out of you. And in the same way that like Sabi, you ask really great questions, right?
right,
And so like one of the reasons why it might seem like I have a lot of energy to talk is because there's just some things that are interesting to me and that are more impressive or more exciting than the tension that I get from um, being an introvert.
right,
So for those that are more introverted, I would again try to find things that you can talk about to people who like or share similar interests, and like don't force yourself to have conversations about things you don't like, right? Like if someone's like you're not an extrovert, or an introvert shouldn't find themselves obligated to like learn how to talk about sports just because you want to learn how to talk about sports. Like that's not your thing. Like don't waste your time. Life's too short.
right.
Um, so yeah, if you talk about something that you care about that comes from the heart, you'll have no problem holding and having a conversation. But on the other hand, of like the value of being extroverted or well networked, I have to give two shout outs here. One to Pierre Rich, um, who basically like proved to me, or he's a networker far beyond what I have. And he also considers himself an introvert, but he can just have amazing conversations with people of all different kinds of fields. And his enthusiasm, his excitement, his desire to just like meet new founders and meet other like-minded people is inspirational to me. I love it. And then Ruben Harris from Career Karma. That guy he's one of the hardest working people that I know. And also he's always networking, he's always hustling, and he's always discussing things that he's an expert in and that's on his mind. And I think he taught me that it's never a bad thing ever to be a thought leader or to talk about things that you have expertise in, because not only do you get to have meaningful conversations with other people who are of that level of expertise, and by doing so, you sharpen and you evolve your knowledge, your understanding, because by articulating yourself well, other people can um, pose questions or refine what you're getting at. And as a group of experts, you all learn together, you kind of elevate one another. He also taught me the value of like having your perspectives out there, because then other people will find what you're doing to be important and exciting and meaningful, and then you might inspire other people. So it was sort of
Right.
like, again, being able to carry the torch. So in terms of how important it is, it's not important to talk about things that you don't care about, right?
Right.
Like, don't force yourself to have conversations about the weather or sports. But if it's something that is important to you, and that you're meaningfully not bad at, you don't even have to be good at it, but like you just not bad at, then I would encourage you to have conversations about those things. Because if you find yourself having unlimited capacity to talk about these things, then it might be you have a strength there. You might have a superpower there. You might not be as introverted as you thought. And other people will want to associate with you. You'll build a name for yourself, and it'll be easier to be an entrepreneur or an expert once people know that you know what you're talking about. Once you can ask these and answer these meaningful questions, people will want to come to work with you because they know you know what you're talking about, and
Right.
that's super super important. That'll give you a ton of leverage.
Right. I love this, man. Man, there's so much gold there. Holy shit. Okay. We're running to the end of the time, so I want to finish off with the
Yeah.
four quick fire questions.
Okay. All right.
One to two
Let's do it.
sentences. Yeah. So first one is one unconventional thinking outside the box kind of thing you guys did in your business.
Okay, so when we were doing Sleep Well, which is the coaching to understand what fixes people's sleep, we actually gave away sleep trackers for free. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to first prove that we could fix people's sleep. But we also knew that one of the reasons people didn't buy sleep trackers is because they don't give you meaningful information. They just tell you what you know, which is that your sleep sucks.
Yeah.
So
Your heart rate is this much or whatever, but you're like, what do I do with that?
exactly. How
Yeah.
do I make that meaningful?
Yeah.
So we decided to give them away and say the value is not in the sleep tracker, but it is in the data and how you use it. And we're providing that. So you're paying us for our time and the data processing, not the actual physical device itself.
Right. Got it. Okay. Number two, advice for someone applying to YC.
Ooh.
I feel like
Okay.
I feel like you gave an amazing advice in your story anyways, but I'm still gonna
Yeah.
ask you again. That was like probably the best advice anybody would have given in my opinion. But
um, I think it's important to be honest and authentic when you
right,
apply to YC.
right,
And that's because a lot of the people that I know, myself included, have changed their ideas from when they applied to when they got in to when they actually pitched at YC. So your idea is not exactly what people are going to judge you on. It'll be who you are, your character, and your ability to get shit done.
yep,
So just be honest, be hardworking, be authentic, and they'll see through that.
yep,
And I know like one of my favorite YC companies, so I'm not going to name, applied to YC, and then when they got an interview, at the interview they said, we hate your idea, you have until the end of the day to come up with a better one, and if we like it, we'll fund you. And they did, and they got funded, and now they're crushing it. So they're investing in you, not your idea. So don't necessarily be tied to your idea.
yep.
Be honest about who you are. Be authentic.
I can relate to that as well. I think it's not about idea as much about like how passionate you are and how how big are you thinking and all that. And obviously, I mean, idea does play a part. Let's be honest, but like
It does,
not as much as people think. It's not 100% that. Yeah, I would
for
agree
sure.
with you on that. Yeah. Okay.
There's an unspoken rule about YC is no assholes. So even if your
Yeah.
idea is amazing and even if you're making millions of dollars a year, they're not going to take you in if they don't feel like you're a good person.
Yeah. You're a good fit to the community. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's right, like because we're good people. Like
Yeah.
YC does bring a good level of camaraderie around. They know how to pick through the assholes
Yeah.
and have just high quality people left over.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Advice for someone starting their first startup.
Okay. Um, Make sure that what you're doing is something that you're passionate about and it's something that you can see yourself working on for 10 years.
Love it.
Generally, it takes that long to see any kind of like really meaningful success. And uh, do it when you're young, actually. Like, or when I'm going to phrase that a little bit differently. Do it when you have little responsibility and an
Yeah.
opportunity to fail.
Yeah.
Because like I happen to just go from straight out of undergraduate right into the entrepreneurial scene. But if I was married and I had kids and I had a lot of obligations, I wouldn't be able to put in the 80 to 100-hour weeks that inevitably you just have to. You
Yeah.
just find yourself doing.
Yeah.
So make sure that you care about what you're doing and do it at a time in your life where you think you can fail, and that tends to be when people are young. Because like let's say you miss out on 2 to 5 years of like career building. Most of the time that's when people are getting their first job that they don't really care about, that they're just like doing to get experience, because every job requires 5 years of experience, right? So they're just getting that 5 years of experience before they can apply to their dream job. So you're not going to miss out on your dream job by doing it early.
Got it. Okay. And last question. If there was
Yeah.
only one thing that people could take away, something that has helped you in your life a lot, what would that be?
Oof. Okay. All right. So throughout all of the iterations, throughout all the experiments, all of the different startup pivots that we've done, what's been the same and what's been consistent is friends and family and community.
Right.
And who you are isn't just what you're working on. And we talked a little earlier about ego and about how people get wrapped up on what they can show other people, what they can tell other people. But it's oftentimes those indescribable, unpointable, unquantifiable parts of life that are the most meaningful and that will give you the most value when your startup inevitably fails. Right? There's a phrase that a friend of mine uses, which is every startup is broken. And that's a fact. Every single startup is broken. It's not fixed. If it were fixed, it would be a big company already.
Right.
So be sure that you're still taking care of yourself. You're not burning your friends and your family for work, because they're the ones that are going to remind you of your value, that are going to keep you up when you're feeling down, and that are there to really support you. And they're happy to see you when you succeed, and they want to see you when you succeed.
Yeah.
And your startup may not live forever, right? 95% of all startups fail, but your family will still be there.
Yeah. I want to add one more point, even if it doesn't feel like it. Yeah.
Even if
Yeah.
What's that like for you? It sounds like there's a story in there.
Yeah, I mean, same thing where, like, I felt like where you see all your friends and you see all your family, right? Well, family, first of all, I don't know. For my family, they were like, what the fuck are you doing? Just go get a normal job, you know? And you're like, well, I'm like taking this risk. All I need is support. I don't need your money. I don't need anything, right? So you
Exactly.
obviously have that feeling where you're like, well, they don't trust in you or they don't support you or whatever, which is obviously not the case. They just want good for you, right?
Exactly.
With friends, I think it feels, especially the friends you're not working with, it feels such a, when you're young, you see all your friends like kind of going out, like I remember my friends
Dude.
partying in Greece and you're like fucking in a basement for like 12-hour days. It feels like shit. It doesn't feel good.
Legit.
Yeah. So that definitely, but you gotta realize that you're looking at the long term and not the short term. So, and that's why it's so
Absolutely.
important, like you said, to be passionate, to be really cared about what you're working on and looking at the 10-year journey. Completely, completely, completely agree with you.
Something you said there really
Yeah,
quickly resonated with me, which is
yeah,
like your family wants the best for you
yeah,
and your friends want the best for you.
yeah,
And like oftentimes they're right, but sometimes they're wrong.
yeah,
And sometimes you need to be comfortable in saying, like, listen, I disagree with these people who think they know me really well and who I love and who I think know me really well, but they're not in my shoes.
yeah,
They don't know my contexts. They don't know my struggles. They want the best for me. But if they were where I am right now, with all the experiences that I've had and all the opportunity that I can see, they would think that I'm making the right choice.
yeah,
And so don't let your friends, your family hold you back either, right?
yeah.
Like
I agree.
they're
Yeah,
be well intentioned.
yeah,
But at the same time, like understand that they do love you. And if they say that you're being stupid by pursuing this startup,
yeah.
they just don't know that they're not living in your shoes.
And
So take that.
either way, you will learn. You'll grow out of it. It's gonna be a great experience either way. So even if you were stupid, it's not gonna change. You know what I mean? Like even if you fail, you're gonna get so many learnings while doing it that it will work out so
Yeah.
well. I
Yeah.
also think I also like to put one word. I think one word in my opinion, at least, or what I've seen when it comes to startup is it involves a lot of sacrifices. So you have to be okay with doing
Ooh.
sacrifices.
Yeah. You know that actually is something that I take for granted, and I just kind
Yeah,
of assume that that's just the way it is because I have sacrificed relationships, right? Like that's
yeah,
one of the reasons why I recommend that it's something you don't do.
yeah,
I have sacrificed friendships. I have sacrificed opportunities and time and money, particularly like and when I was living out of my own savings after I graduated, trying to figure out how to do this whole entrepreneurship thing, right? So sacrifice is a huge, huge part of it. But for those of you that are hearing that and are thinking, oh, like sacrifice, what do I get in response? There is a prize, and that prize, even if you fail, is self-understanding. And when you sacrifice something that you didn't want to have sacrificed, you then understand that that thing is important to you, and you're not going to sacrifice it again,
yeah,
or that the prize or the reward for that kind of a sacrifice has to be so high and the guarantee has to be so precise that it's worth doing that again.
right.
So you will learn through your failures, you'll learn through that sacrifice, but it's absolutely a part of the journey, and you can't have success without giving up, like you said, the opportunity to go out, or the chances to like even be with your family sometimes for outings. You literally cannot. You're stuck, you're busy, you're grinding. But they'll understand.
Yeah,
If you're honest with them and you're vulnerable with them, they'll get it.
Exactly. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming to the show. That was all amazing, man. That was probably the best podcast. But thanks,
Don't tell
thanks.
your other guests. No,
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
can't
kidding.
tell that.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
I
It's
appreciate
been
it, bro.
great.